Welcome to Mrs. Casalicchio's Flipped Classroom. Episode 2, George Washington Carver. Who was George Washington Carver? He was an inventor, a scientist, a botanist, a professor, an artist, and a humanitarian. But let's start at the beginning, when he was a kid, just like you. George Washington Carver was born a slave in Diamond Grove, Missouri in 1864. His mother was taken by night riders when he was a baby. He was sickly with whooping cough. Slavery was abolished when he was just a year old. His owners became his parents. They took care of George and his older brother, now orphans, and raised them as their own children. Because of his poor health, he had chores and responsibilities that kept him in the house cooking and cleaning and learning the art of sewing and knitting. Mrs. Carver taught him how to read and write. He loved being outdoors in his spare time and thinking about nature. His head was constantly full of questions about how plants grew and how nature was connected. When he was still a young boy, he decided to leave home and seek out his education. He could not go to the local schools. They were racist. Could you imagine going out on your own as a child? He traveled all the way into Kansas, finding jobs to support himself. Here's George's young man. He was responsible about attending school and buying his own books. He wanted to know about everything. He was very good at wondering. His wondering helped him create experiments to find answers and ask more questions. He loved botany, the study of plants. He also loved art. He loved to knit, do needlepoint, weave fibers, and paint. He played the piano as well. He applied to Highland University in Kansas by mail. They accepted him, but when he arrived and saw that he was African American, they turned him away because of his race. He applied for admission at Ames University in Iowa. He was accepted and became a student in the agricultural department. His new ideas about agriculture were so compelling that, upon graduating, the university asked him to be a professor, the first African American faculty member. George is a scientist and teacher. A famous African American named Booker T. Washington contacted George about being a professor at Tuskegee University in Alabama. This school was for black students only. The education given there helped to address the emergence of African Americans out of slavery. George became a professor at Tuskegee. He taught not only the students, but the surrounding communities about subsistence farming and the importance of crop rotation. These two things helped his people become more successful at producing food to build strong communities. He suggested planting peanuts to enrich the soil that had been deprived of nutrients from years of cotton production. He discovered that peanut plants are resistant to a pest called the boll weevil. Peanut crops could help people make a good living. George's amazing inventions. George spent the rest of his life experimenting in the lab at Tuskegee. He is most famous for his nearly 300 inventions derived from peanuts. He invented paints, plastics, makeup, engine fuel, clothing dye, peanut milk, and good old peanut butter, to name a few. He used his peanut oil to help people who suffered from weakened limbs as a result of polio. He did not patent his inventions because he believed that the benefits his inventions provided should be free for everyone. He worked on these inventions to encourage farmers to plant peanuts. He also found a variety of purposes for yams and soybeans. Many famous people sought counsel from George. Mahatma Gandhi asked for his help with the crops in India and nutrition. Thomas Edison offered him a high-paying position, but he turned it down, while President Franklin Delano Roosevelt visited him at Tuskegee, and Henry Ford shared a friendship with the humble scientist. He stayed at Tuskegee until he passed away in 1943. Tuskegee University created the George Washington Carver Museum on their campus to permanently imprint his legacy. George Washington Carver National Monument. George Washington Carver is the first African American to have a national monument. It is located in Missouri on the acreage of his birth. There is a replica of a science lab that he worked in, a replica of his home as a child, examples of the science behind his discoveries, and the samples of his artwork, which he did even as an old man. So, if you love peanut butter, think of George Washington Carver when you spread it on your sandwich. Here are some vocabulary words for you to review, and we will talk about George tomorrow in class.